right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in just another minute once everyone has joined us from the waiting room.
I'm in.
All right, lots of people in. Thank you everyone for joining us. You will be muted when you first come in. And you should be able to see my screen that is being shared. As we're getting everyone settled in, if you want to go ahead and share your name and your organization in the chat function. We're not going to have a chance to go around and introduce everyone, but if you go to the chat and just give us your name and your organization or who you're representing or what community you're from, that would be great so everyone can see who's here in the room with us. Thanks, folks who are starting to do it. All right, well, we'll get started. I know there's going to be a few more folks joining us as we go along, but we want to get started. We have you guys here with us for an hour and a half, and we want to use your time wisely. So once again, thank you for joining us here today. My name is Dana LeWinter. I am the Director of Municipal Engagement at CHAPA. I send my regards from Rachel Heller, our CEO, who is unable to join us today. But everyone on our staff is really excited about these regional meetings and being able to have all of us together, even if we're not in the room together. It's nice to see so many of your faces and be able to connect virtually. We've done these regional meetings before, usually in a location. This year we're doing it obviously a little bit differently, but the whole point of this meeting is to bring some of what we've been discussing on our Friday CHAPA calls down to the more regional and local level. So thank you all for being here. All right, so just for those of you who don't know CHAPA well, I just want to give you a quick primer on who we are. We are an organization whose mission is to encourage production and preservation of housing that's affordable, and we work to foster diverse and sustainable communities. We advocate, we expand access to housing, we develop the field, and we do that at the federal, state, and local levels. And so we're excited to hear from all of you about what's happening locally and also share with you what we're doing across the state. I do want to thank our annual regional meeting sponsor, Bank of America. They've sponsored these meetings for a little while now, and without them, we wouldn't be able to do this work. So thank you very much to Bank of America for making these meetings possible. And I also want to thank our local participating co-host, NeighborWorks Housing Solutions. We've got a couple folks from NeighborWorks on the call. I'll be introducing them in just a second. But before we get going, I'm going to turn it over to Whitney to get us started off with some questions to get us thinking about why we're here today. So go for it, Whitney.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dana. So I'm going to share a poll. It looks as though I may not be able to start it, actually. Seems as though someone may have logged in after me under the account. So maybe a B, if you're there, if you could start the poll. Do you see that at the very bottom?
Hold. Okay. I just launched the polling.
Yeah, that would be great. And hopefully you all are able to see that now. I'll look for head nods to indicate that you can see it. And if you could take the time to just answer a few of those questions, and then hopefully it will give us some context for our discussion today. And for those who just joined in the chat, we're also just indicating who we are, introducing ourselves in the chat. So if you finish early, you can also do that as well. So I'll give you a few minutes to complete that.
We aren't being graded on this, correct?
You're not being graded. No, please just answer as best you can those questions that are there. And hopefully we'll get some context to what we're going to discuss a little bit later on. No wrong answers in that way. Abi, what percentage are we at for?
We are 36%.
36. Okay, so we'll give you guys a few more minutes to kind of work your way through those questions, and then we will read off the results.
We are almost at 50%. Let me know.
I think that's good. We can go from there.
Do you want me to read out the answers and you want to give the context there, Whitney?
Yeah, so if you want, you can, so you're saying that folks are probably done? What percentage are we at now? About 60?
73. So I think.
Oh, perfect. So you can probably end it there.
Okay.
I know some folks are joining us on the call and are unable to participate in the poll. Okay, and then there should be a feature for you to be able to share the results so that folks can see that.
Okay, I think I did that.
Okay, great. So I'll look for head nods to indicate that you guys can see the results there. And so I'll just read through some of the answers to kind of just work our way through the poll. So the first question was, according to, well, who is on the call? Actually, Abi, because I can't see it. Would you happen to be able to read, let us know who is here with us today?
Can you repeat that, Whitney?
Can you see the first question?
Oh yeah, who do you represent? And the maximum answer went to local community organizations. We have 37% local community organizations, 13% statewide, and 17% from local municipalities.
Awesome, awesome. And so it's good to see how many of you all are here representing those different groups. I know some of you may be having some overlap there, right? But happy to have you all as part of this. We really do see this as an opportunity to have more folks engage in our regional meetings. The fact that it is virtually, you know, despite it being somewhat of a barrier, we do see it as a sort of an opportunity area to engage as many of you all as we can. So I believe the second question is, according to the American List, what percentage of American renter households were unable to make their housing payments in May of 2020? The answer there is 22%, actually. 22%.
And 47% have said that it's 30%. It's actually a little lower, I guess.
Yeah, so 22%, yeah, in May. Then the next question, according to AmericanList.com, what percentage of American homeowner households were unable to make their payments in May of 2020? And that percentage was actually 22% as well. 22% as well. The next question is, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and we'll share some links to some of those reports and the places where we got a lot of this information, and hopefully it does sort of guide some of the conversations you guys are having locally. So according to the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on New England homeowners and renters, how many New England households are at risk of missing their mortgage or their rent or mortgage payment due to coronavirus-related job loss? The answer there is actually more than 1 million. More than 1 million. The next question, I believe, is, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, impact of COVID-19 pandemic on New England homeowner household and renters report, under the best case scenario, how much lost housing payment is likely to accrue in New England from April to July? And the answer actually there was $1.42 billion. $1.42 billion. The next question was, according to the MAPC update to the COVID-19 layoff housing gap report, another great report, what percentage of standard unemployment claims come from the following only these three occupations: food preparation and serving, office and administrative support, and sales? And that was 40%. 40% from just those three occupations. And then if you could read the following two questions, I believe.
Yeah, have you been to a CHAPA regional meeting before? And I see that 57% of you have attended a meeting before and 43% have not.
Okay, great. And that's our last question, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we're so glad that many of you all who haven't been able to participate in these regional meetings are able to join us today. And thank you for bearing with us as we kind of navigated that. Thank you, my colleague and friend Avi, for helping me do that. And again, we'll share some of the reports where you guys can lean into some of this additional resources to kind of have the conversations you're having on local level. So I'll turn it back over to Dana.
Thank you, Whitney and Abi. As Whitney said, we're going to share some of those reports in the chat function. And for those of you who are just joining us, please remember to share who you are in the chat. And I'm going to give you a quick tip. In the chat function, if you go to the bottom next to where it says File, there are three little dots right next to each other. Before you leave this meeting, right-click on it, and you can save the chat. So as we're sharing a lot of information, you'll see there will be a lot of links and a lot of resources shared in that chat function. You'll be able to save it before you go. We'll also be sharing this presentation afterwards and all of the materials, but just a tip for you if you're furiously writing down all these stats and reports and resources, please take a moment to do that. So I'm just going to walk us through the agenda real quickly. We're going to hear in just a minute some regional updates from our folks at NeighborWorks Housing Solutions, Rob Corley and Maureen Fitzgerald. Then Abi Curve and Ryan Dominguez from the CHAPA policy staff are going to give us some updates on our policy priorities that we've been working on. Then Whitney's going to talk to you a little bit about what our municipal engagement initiative is. And then we're going to do some regional sharing. I'll give you some data to dig in a little bit more to what you're seeing in the region. And then we're going to do breakout discussions. So please do not leave us because we are going to hear from you all. I know it's hard with this many people on a call to share, but we have about 50 folks on here. We will have time for questions. If you have a question for any of our speakers, please just throw that into the chat and we will try to answer them as best we can. But we will have time for discussion as well with some discussion prompts. And we're going to be looking to get that feedback from you. So let's get going. We will hear from Rob Corley and Maureen Fitzgerald from NeighborWorks Housing Solutions. Thanks so much for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Corley. I'm the CEO of NeighborWorks Housing Solutions. It's good to see many of you. I'm recognizing some of the faces. I'm just going to start off by telling you a little bit about our organization. Those of you who are not familiar, I go through some of the things that we've been seeing here, and then I'll pass it over to Maureen to talk a little bit more about rental assistance and some of the other things that we see happening over the next couple of months. So we have offices, just to give you an idea of our geography. So we have offices in Quincy, Brockton, Kingston, and New Bedford. We cover quite a large area in southern Massachusetts, basically the South Shore, southeastern Mass. And like all of you have been adjusting to the COVID crisis and trying to continue to provide our services across that large region, and some of those services needed now more than ever. That's been quite a challenge. And to that point, all of our services, or many of them, have been provided in person with lots of paper, and traditionally have been that way for many, many years. So for us, one of the biggest things was trying to stand up an operation of providing services to everybody remotely. Again, like many of you, this has been a new challenge, but also an opportunity for us to become more efficient and provide our services to those that can receive it, through technology across the entire region. And our staff has done an amazing job at standing up an operation in order to do that. Also, we've found during this crisis that I think many of you have, that we've been relying on our partners a lot more, and the strengths of our partnerships have really shown through here, including our partnership with CHAPA. I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk today about what's going on in our region, but the calls that you've been having during this crisis have been vital for all of us to get together for best practices and just for support in general. We've also seen that in our municipalities as well, with a lot of our partners in cities and towns across the region. All of us communicating, getting together, and trying to come up with some solutions, I dare say housing solutions, during this difficult time. But as a member of NeighborWorks America, as a member of MACDC, RHN, proud member of CHAPA, and many others, the network we have in this state, we're very lucky to have each other to rely on to try to stand up to services and all that we're trying to do in our communities. So a few things for us. We develop affordable housing. We have home ownership centers, financial coaching, all types of education programs that we offer. And we also provide services directly from the state and RAFT, rental assistance, some shelter programming, vouchers, etc. And all of that has been put under strain during this crisis, but all of it has remained operational and open. And I'll highlight a couple of them. For affordable housing, we have 3 projects in pipeline now. I think Tim Doherty is on the line here somewhere, our real estate development director. But these projects outside of Boston have not paused. They've actually continued, and in some cases even accelerated in some ways due to the lack of other production in other parts of the state. So our affordable housing developments have continued. One of them in Quincy, a veterans home in Marshfield, and a workforce housing, affordable housing development in downtown Brockton. And for many, those have been inspirational things to see continue during this time of great crisis. So that's been something we've kept going. Our home ownership centers have also kept going. We have a variety of different models we offer for home buyer education, landlord training, financial coaching. We've always offered those things online and in different ways for those that would like to receive them that way. Obviously, the face-to-face options on those classes have changed and have definitely not been available. So we've enhanced how we offer our homebuyer education, still CHAPA certified with one-on-one counseling. We're doing that in Zoom meetings and breakout rooms. And we've offered during this crisis time, our education for free in some cases, so that people can take advantage of that. And we've seen a great response in home buyer education. I think a lot of people are taking advantage of this time, at least especially in the earlier months of the crisis, when the weather wasn't so great, to take advantage of home buyer education online. And our counselors have become, like all of us, Zoom experts. We're doing breakout rooms and one-on-ones and budgets and all that thing. I think there's actually one starting in about an hour for us at NeighborWorks this afternoon. We're offering those on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. So our team has done just a great job. We've also put together a hotline, a counseling hotline. Initially, we did see a lot of folks reaching out to us about worries about being able to pay their mortgage, similar to the polls we just saw, just looking for information on the moratorium, on what this means. Do I have to pay my mortgage? Do I have to pay my rent? So we wanted to stand up a way for people to quickly get in touch with us. And that counseling hotline was key to that. We also have a RAFT hotline for rental assistance, which was always there, but certainly became even more popular. For us, as we've been looking at this as an organization, we closed our doors in early March to the public, and as I mentioned, we have a open office, people coming into our offices all the time. So that was really challenging. Our offices still remain closed to the general public, although as an organization of approximately 80 employees, we have had our offices open in a variety of different ways during this period of time. More and more are trending back to a sort of telecommuting and mixed type of work environment where they're coming in and so on. But to talk a little bit more about our rental assistance program and some of the numbers that we've seen over this period of time, I'd like to turn it over to Maureen Fitzgerald to fill us in. Maureen needs no introduction in this forum, but Maureen, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
I guess I've been to too many CHAPA meetings is what he's saying, right? I'm the Director of External Policy and Advocacy at NeighborWorks Housing Solutions, and I have had the pleasure of being in a number of the CHAPA working groups and committees. And I'm delighted to now be involved in the regional meeting. So when we talk about rental assistance, we have some permanent rental assistance programs, Section 8 or HCVP vouchers, MRVP. You know, we've, just as a sort of side note, the folks that we're seeing who are assisted through those programs, we're getting an awful lot of requests for changes in income and changes in rent shares, as you might imagine. That's the bulk of the work that we are prioritizing as we go through that. But the big demand, and I think what's of most pertinence to this conversation and right now, is the short-term rental assistance work that we're doing. Primarily building on residential assistance to families in transition, or RAFT. And I know this is, I've joked with the CHAPA staff, it seems to be the most common thing that comes up in the chats, no matter what the conversation is lately, because it's one of the few resources that we have here in the state. And we are, we're really grateful to be able to help get that funding out the door and out to people who need it. So residential assistance to families in transition, or RAFT, is for folks who are at 50% of area median income, targeting to 30% of area median income. We, within our region, primarily Plymouth and Bristol County, had exhausted the RAFT funds for this year prior to the pandemic. So historically, as I'm sure many of you know, there's tremendous need in this region. We have a lot of gateway cities. Although it's a diverse region in terms of the wealth and resources, we've definitely got some areas of need. So we were very pleased when the state released an additional $5 million for RAFT at the very end of May. Out of that, we here on the South on NeighborWorks Housing Solutions, Plymouth and Bristol counties, we received about $400,000 in RAFT funds initially. And we are burning through that. And now the final, we've gotten an additional $115,000 that we're working on getting out the door. As Rob mentioned, we had a hotline set up. We also set up an online screening application process, and have on the hotline, we also have there's people can leave messages in different languages, and we will try to get someone who speaks your language back, calling you back. The volume has been tremendous, as you, I'm sure all well know. The demand has been exceptional. We've gotten over 1,600 inquiries over that last 10 weeks or so. We now have 511 households in the pipeline. So those are people who've gone through the initial screening, who are, working with the landlords to get the documentation. We usually see about 80% of that group end up ultimately receiving assistance through RAFT. So we're working through as quickly as we can on that. We're obviously concerned. One of the issues that we've talked about at other CHAPA meetings is funding and the availability of these resources. We're burning through them quickly. And that's with a couple guardrails in place. One of those guardrails is the eviction and foreclosure moratorium, because just a reminder, RAFT can also be used for homeowners. And now that moratorium is going to end at some point, unless the emergency order is extended. That will end in August. And then also for folks who were eligible for unemployment, that additional $600 a week in unemployment is going to end in July. So we're anticipating an uptick in all of that. We're also working with, in RAFT, we're able to assist people who are not eligible for unemployment, particularly undocumented folks. So if you're unable to receive unemployment because you're not a documented citizen, you are still eligible if you meet the other criteria for raft. So again, another source of pressure and demand on raft. Across the region, obviously, I'm sure people are familiar with the COVID statistics. Brockton is the #2 hotspot in the country, I'm sorry. Oh, that would be a nightmare, in the state. The other thing I want to mention that was interesting, one of the stats that you referenced was the community lab and the work that MHP has done with Boston Indicators. If you really look at that by community, there's a lot of information that's really interesting there. Brockton turns out to have the highest percentage of essential workers of any of the top 100 communities. So the folks in Brockton are working in the service industry, in hospitality, in nursing homes, you know, and a lot of folks are either losing their jobs or being exposed to the virus. I mean, we've seen quite an impact down there. And so at this point, we're working to try to keep folks stable so that people don't hit the wall when that eviction moratorium ends.
I'll just add a couple things there, Maureen, and then when it comes to Brockton, so I think Maureen will now, we'll pivot to talking about what other funding is coming for other income bands potentially.
Yep.
But in Brockton, we're working with that municipality where they're an entitlement community on a rental assistance program. And we've been in touch with others. We're working with Randolph on Resilient Randolph and their rental assistance program. And in communities like Quincy, I think they've done an amazing job also of standing up different types of programs with local resources. And we can, we're potentially working with Weymouth or any other municipality that's on from the region that's interested in partnering or just having a conversation about how we better promote our RAFT program and or any additional resources we have for those people in need. And just to pick up on a couple of stats that Maureen mentioned, that 515 people that we currently have, those are folks that are basically ready or at that approval stage. And as Maureen mentioned, usually 80% of them end up getting an approval for RAFT. And what we're seeing right now is about an average of $3,100 per household in RAFT assistance. And if you just play that out, it's about $1.2 million in rental assistance that we would need as of today. If we stop providing any more RAFT as of today, not the end of the moratorium, just today, we would need $1.2 million to just service the rental assistance need we have currently. And again, that's for 50% AMI and below. We've had many homeowners and others reach out to us that are not qualified because they're 50% or above. So Mari, maybe you can maybe pivot to the next part here, which is what we're hoping to do with Irma.
Irma.
Hello, can I ask?
Yes.
So thank you for the Robert and Maureen to introduction. I just wondering, do you have any program can help a landlord for the mortgage at this several months? Yes.
Yeah, so the RAFT program for income eligible landlords, our property owner, is eligible. So we do have
where is the website I can go?
We can
I'll
share
post
that
that
in
we
the
will
chat.
definitely
Yeah,
put that
would
on
that
the
be
chat.
helpful? We can share the website in the chat function so that you can go straight to that website as well.
Also, go your CHAPA website, right?
No, it's the NeighborWorks Housing Solutions website, and we'll share the link to that in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, and it will depend on where you live. So throughout the state, depending on where you live. If you live in our region, we can help you. If not, we can refer you to someone that can.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we do see, and clearly there's a need in a little higher income band. And that's what we're pleased to see with the IRMA, the Emergency Rental Assistance Funds that are coming through the Federal CARES Act and CDBG funding, whether it's through the entitlement communities or the state now had with their balance of state allocations for the non-entitlement communities. is allowing folks who are between 50 and 80% of area median income to be assisted. Similar to RAFT in that it can be homeowners, it can be tenants. So we're pleased to see that expansion because that is a growing area of need. Rob mentioned the communities that are doing it directly. We know there are a number of municipalities looking at using CPC funds and other local funds to try to make sure that their tenants and their homeowners can remain where they are. And I think with that, maybe I'll segue back to Dana and let you take it away. Unless I missed anything, Rob.
No, I think you got it.
Okay.
No,
All
that's
right.
This is
good.
great. Thank you both, Rob and Maureen, for all of that information and really for bringing it local to kind of the need that you're seeing there. It echoes what we've been hearing in our Friday calls and in our research, but really helpful to hear what's happening in this region. I hope you all were listening because that's going to be a lot of what we're going to be discussing in our small group discussions. I'm going to reshare my screen here. I hope folks can see it. And I'm going to move on to state policy updates with Abhi, who you heard from earlier. So Abhi, if you want to take it away from here.
Thank you, Dana. I am Abhidnya. I go by Abhi. I'm the policy associate at CHAPA, and I thank you all for joining us today. It's always, we always look forward to hearing from all of you folks. So I just want to give an update on the state policy work that we have been doing at CHAPA and sort of, coming off from what Maureen and Rob just talked about. There is a lot of need for housing assistance right now, and we are trying to sort of, connect with our members and make sure we are advocating for priorities that will ensure housing stability, and we are advocating for equitable policies to make sure that we are supporting renters, homeowners, landlords, and just overall sustaining our housing ecosystem through this crisis and going forward to recovery. And we know that we already had a affordable housing crisis before the pandemic hit, so it's a lot going on, but we are trying to move forward with our priorities. So as Maureen and Rob pointed out, there is a huge need for RAFT assistance, and that's why what we are advocating for is a $50 million appropriation, in addition to the traditional RAFT, which is the COVID RAFT. So that's what we have been asking for to expand its access up to 80% AMI, and make sure that there is enough funding for below 30% AMI households, and also increase the cap from 4,000 to 10,000, because what we are seeing is, and what we're expecting is, as we come near to the eviction moratorium ending, people may have accrued a lot of back rent, and certainly the amount may go beyond 4,000, and that's why we are trying to advocate for an increasing cap in 10,000, and a figure that comes with that is a 50 million appropriation. But it's certainly a start. We are not sure how much this is going to be going forward, and so right now this is what we are advocating for, and also 6.25 million funding for the HCECs, which are sort of the frontline agencies for housing assistance, and the great work that they are doing. As Maureen pointed out, there's a huge spike in calls across the HCECs in Massachusetts, and we really need to make sure that we are able to provide those services to households across Massachusetts. And that's where we would be advocating for an expansion of RAFT, and I'll talk more about going forward how you can contribute to that effort. At CHAPA, we are also looking at, as we are trying to look for what sources can we leverage for these programs, with the state revenues being down, the federal assistance that has been coming in has been a really great resource that we can leverage at this point, and we have some ongoing efforts on coordinating those federal resources, especially around ESG, and making sure they are diverted at this point for not just shelters, but also rapid rehousing and making sure that in the long term, we have enough housing for people in a safe way and not just, in crowded shelters. So that is what we have been working on the local level, on the state level, as well as the federal level. We are trying to advocate for these resources, but and I'll speak more about what you can do in that effect going forward. We are also, one of our priorities is as the eviction moratorium comes to end, we do expect that there will be a huge wave of evictions that are being filed. And at that point, right to counsel is going to be extremely critical in order to make sure that many of those tenancies are saved. And so the right to counsel bill was filed prior to COVID, but right now there is a new bill filed that would put out a pilot program for right to counsel as for full legal representation in eviction proceedings for tenants and owner occupants whose incomes do not exceed 200% of federal poverty line. And not forgetting our eye on the housing choice legislation that we have been trying to push for a really long time. And with all the conversations that have been going around the racial equity and trying to get a sense of how we can contribute to having more racial equity in not just policing, but like other areas and housing more so than ever. This is where housing choice sort of, is a step towards that, which ensures that there is a equal balance of power and people of different, race, color are able to get housing in certain communities that have traditionally not been sort of been close to that affordable housing and across incomes. So housing choice legislation is something that we are also trying to move forward with at this point, but definitely our focus is more on the COVID priorities. The next slide, Gina. Thank you. And in terms of budget, in addition to the RAFT and its CECs, we have been trying to advocate for more funding for public housing authorities, the state public housing authorities, and they have sort of gotten some of that authorization through the supplemental budget that was filed by the governor. We are trying to move that forward with 13.5 million in that for public housing authorities, and also some of that pot for homeless shelters that have been doing a lot to ensure there are safe and social distancing guidelines that are being implemented. We are also trying to push forward our 2021 FY 2021 budget, which at this point it's not clear what that process is going to be. How is that budget process going to look like? But there may be a monthly or a quarterly budget that is proposed and implemented, and we are trying to make sure that our programs like MRVP, AHVP, which provide housing vouchers, do not see a funding cut, and we make sure that as incomes go down, actually those programs might get expensive, but this is the time that we really need those programs to be working. And so we are going to make sure that we advocate for those programs to get adequately funded. And we are also trying to get more funding for permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness who have all sorts of different needs, and for them to have, at this point of time, to have a space where their needs are being met and they are being able to be housed is extremely essential for the public health. And at this point of time, we do realize that more than ever, like, housing is health, and that is what we are working towards to ensure that everybody has a safe house, and we move forward with these policies. I would love to post some links, so that, which I will do after I finish my talk, to make sure that you have all the resources and, get out what you can do to advance these priorities. Next slide. Oh, okay, I can let Ryan do that and then go on to the part where you can take the action. Ryan will speak about the federal priorities that CHAPA has been working on.
All right, thank you, B. So as mentioned, I'm Ryan Dominguez, Policy Analyst at CHAPA, And I also help to coordinate the New England Housing Network, which has a number of member organizations that make up affordable housing organizations across each of the New England states. And together with the New England Housing Network, we have been doing a lot of advocacy down in DC, holding virtual calls and meetings to really fight for resources in the housing and homelessness space, to be included in the CARES Act, as well as in the House's Heroes Act. And we'll continue to fight for a lot of those resources in any potential next kind of funding package that comes from the federal government. As a network, we've also been advocating with various agencies, including HUD and the Treasury, to try to get additional kind of regulatory waiver flexibilities for some of the programs that have already been funded through the CARES Act and other funding sources. So we've now kind of turned our attention back to the state and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and we've been focusing more on the state and local level in terms of trying to figure out the best way to allocate the funds from the CARES Act. And we've been focusing on three sources of funding from the CARES Act. The first is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF. The second pool of money is the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG. And the third source of funding is the Emergency Solutions Grants, or ESG. So Coronavirus Relief Fund is the biggest pool of money that Massachusetts has received. In total, Massachusetts received $2.7 billion in its CRF, and the governor actually put out around 25%, or $502 million, directly to cities and towns across the Commonwealth to use the CRF funds as they see necessary. So to give you a little bit of a local reference, Quincy received $8.3 million, Weymouth received $5 million, and Braintree received $3.2 million. So other states and some of their cities and towns have used the CRF fund to fund things like emergency rental assistance. And we're working on a proposal at CHAPA right now to ask for around $100 million in additional rental assistance to be put through RAF so that we have additional resources now and after the eviction moratorium ends. Our proposal is still in the works, but we're also going to be including $6 million for a right to counsel pilot program, as Abhi has mentioned previously, as well as additional funding for senior housing operating costs. So moving on, as I mentioned, another pool or source of money from the federal government was CDBG. And CDBG can be used for things such as up to 3 months of rental assistance, as well as funding housing counseling programs across the state. And in total, Massachusetts received $86.8 million, and 40 million of those dollars went directly to entitlement communities. To highlight some of your municipalities again, Quincy received around $1 million, Brockton received around $841,000, and Weymouth received around $419,000. And finally, there's the bucket of ESG money that can be used to support shelters as well as fund rapid rehousing. The Commonwealth received around $104 million for ESG, and close to around $60 million went directly to entitlement communities. And Quincy received around $1.8 million for ESG. So I'll add 2 documents in the chat that kind of outlines each of the cities and towns that received money from these 3 sources. And before I kick it back to Abhi to talk about what we can do now, I'll just say that as local advocates, I think your biggest impact can be, contacting your local municipal elected officials as well as your state representatives to really ask them to be a part of the conversation of allocating these federal dollars out towards housing and homelessness resources and relief. And I think that, you should really ask them to have some type of public process or public comment period so you can voice your concerns and make sure that, these resources are allocated properly. So with that, I'll kick it back to Abhi, and I'll put 2 charts in the chat for all of you to review.
Thank you, Ryan. And as I mentioned before, the best thing to do right now regarding RAFT is to advocate to your state legislature legislator and ask them to support the $50 million ask for raft. The one thing that we have been doing is asking for $50 million in whatever way possible. If it is through the supplemental budget or through the next year's budget or through a separate funding source, that's fine, but we do need these dollars for raft, and that's how we have been advocating for that. We do have a sample letter that you can use and some materials that you can use for the raft advocacy. We also had a webinar a couple of days ago just talking about raft and how it fits in with the other local emergency assistance programs. And I would be happy to post those links so you can make available those materials. Also, as Ryan said, that the best thing is write to municipal officials and decision makers, because there's so much money coming into the local communities from the federal side. It is really important to know these funds are being used, and if possible, have advocate for a voice in these decisions so that they are directed to the programs that are really in need. And so we also do have a letter that you can use, a template letter that you can use to send your local officials and ask them to be a part and be engaged and have a public process in making these federal dollars available for communities. The place where we do have that CHAPA has all these discussions are our whole host of communities, committees that we are hosting, focused on budget priorities, which is our Building Blocks Coalition. If you're able to participate in those, it'll be really great, because we want to hear more perspectives, and as we advocate for how funds are being used, what policies we are advocating, it would be great to have more input from all of you. So we have committees focused on budget. We have a committee focused on homelessness prevention and economic mobility. We have a public housing committee and a rental assistance committee, which deals with MRVP, EHVP, and housing vouchers and rental assistance. It would be really great if you can go on our website and sign up for these committees. It has a whole host of information regarding policies in these topics. So with that, I'll get back to Dana, and I'm happy to answer any other questions in this topic.
Thank you so much, Abhi and Ryan. And as you can see, they are furiously sharing items in the chat, materials that you can take a look at. There was a question in the chat about ESG funds to Brockton. Ryan did answer that unfortunately Brockton did not receive any directly, but they may be able to access the state non-entitlement funds. So if folks have other questions about these materials, please feel free to ask them in the chat or reach out to us directly. So now I'm going to hand it over to Whitney Demetrius to tell you a little bit about our municipal engagement initiative.
Thanks, Dana. So speaking of what to do now, right? Wouldn't it be great if you had a group of vested residents in your local community who took on the task of housing and all of this different work, right? So that's sort of the idea of what's happened in the creation of the Municipal Engagement Initiative program back in 2018, the idea being that building support for affordable housing and housing production in communities across the Commonwealth is really the goal, with the idea that local support can make or break housing development from actually happening, right? And for so many of the things that happen on the local level. So we're happy to talk about some local strategies about how to sort of do this coalition building work. So one idea is to support the efforts in each community to build, a culture that really will welcome housing, and including affordable housing specifically. It will bolster the efforts to expand housing opportunities in these communities and grow the number of people supporting housing production in each community. So thinking outside of the box of who those people are in your community who are vested already, and how do you get them together and to have one voice around some of these issues, specifically in this moment that we're in, with many of these crises sort of breaking the silos of folks who want to do something and see housing as healthcare, as Abhi mentioned, and really thinking about how to create housing on the local level that's accessible, that's healthy, that's safe, that's accessible, and all of those different things. And so in terms of local strategies right now, we are in several different communities. 9 of our communities right now are Amherst, Acton, Arlington, Medford, Essex, Newton, Foxborough, Revere, and Lynn. And then we're actually in 2 MEI-like communities, Agawam and Brookline. And so each of those communities are very different. But one thing that's the same about each of them is that each of them are unique, right? Every community locally is unique. And so in terms of how to start to do this work, you really want to identify who those core folks are in your community to begin having those conversations. Who are the partners, right? We think about housing as sort of core to so much of what becomes vested interests for various folks, right? Whether it is policing, whether it is healthcare, whether it is, businesses, all of that, the core at all of that is where you're able to actually live, right? To be able to access all of those things. So how do you bring all of those folks into the conversation? How do you utilize data to sort of drive those conversations, right? All of the things that we're seeing right now in the midst of these dual crises that we're in, how do you utilize that to sort of drive those conversations? So the idea really is, in terms of how do you start, right? You launch an event, you create the meeting, you get the folks in the room who are interested in the work and sort of go through the process. And then you think about who's not there, right? And sort of expanding upon that to think about how many more voices are essential to being part of the conversation. We often think about stakeholders as many of the experts in their fields, etc. But how do we really start to think about everyone as an expert in their own right and expand our thinking about who stakeholders are? So on our website, we have developed an MEI Lite toolkit to sort of help you all in thinking about sort of launching this. Where do I go to expand it? I'm happy that Abby and Ryan have shown you guys what you can do now personally, right, to advocate for some of these things. But how do you have a collective group of folks who are working on these issues, who are developing inclusionary zoning policies and proposing those things, who are putting together forums to educate the community about particular housing issues or concerns, who are meeting with legislators and having a larger impact and voice. So we did develop a toolkit to kind of get you started thinking about what does an agenda for a first meeting look like? Who are my stakeholders? How do I think outside the box of the same 5 people who I know are interested in this work in my local community? So we do encourage you to look at that website and utilize that toolkit. And again, we're also here to help you through that process. You may not know many people in your community, so we also have on our website a Tell Us Where You Live tool. So we invite you all to go on the website, fill that out, and also to reach out to us so that we can connect you all with local folks in your community who are interested in doing this sort of work as well. And so, and on that note, I guess I will turn it over to Dana to kind of give us some context to some of the conversation that we'll be having later on. Dana?
Thank you so much, Whitney. I'll just echo what Whitney said. We're happy to talk to anyone and everyone, and actually the folks, I recognize some folks on this call who we've come out to speak with, and you've been able to launch some of your efforts. We've found that in this moment, having an organized coalition of housing advocates has allowed people to move more quickly on getting emergency rental assistance up and running, getting the word out about where people can access that, making sure that developments continue to move forward. So happy to be a part of those conversations in your community. We're about to do our breakout rooms, but before we do that, I just want to set the stage for the conversations you're going to have. So I'm going to share a little bit of data and context expanding upon what we heard from Maureen and Rob and Whitney at the beginning of the call. So this is exactly what I think Maureen was referring to. This is from the COVID Community Data Lab. It's an amazing source of information that I would encourage all of you to go look at. You know, Brockton has a COVID case rate of 432 per 10,000 residents. That's the second highest, I believe, in the state. And some of the things that the data has shown have an impact on rates are overcrowding, Brockton has a 4% rate of overcrowding. 66% of residents are of color, and 16% of households are in poverty. But this chart here is showing specifically that cities with more frontline workers have higher COVID rates. And you can see Brockton up here at the top, Brockton and Chelsea, number 1 and 2 rates, and the highest percentages of frontline workers. So something to keep in mind as you're talking. This is obviously just one community in your region, but obviously is showing where the biggest impact is right now. Obviously, again, this should not be any surprise to you all. As we heard at the beginning, overall, 22% of households made no rent or mortgage payments in May, both renters and mortgage holders. But lower income households, if we dig in a little bit deeper, are less likely to have made their full May housing payments. So you can see the lower income bracket we're looking at, the more likely the household is to have made either no payment or many of them to have made a partial payment. And so those are the folks that we're really concerned about. Certainly there has been an eviction moratorium, a mortgage foreclosure moratorium, but these are people who have back rent and back mortgages paid, or that are due at the end of this. And just looking forward, again, evictions are halted, but when this moratorium ends, what's the coming crisis beyond the crisis that we're all concerned about? Less than half of surveyed renters and homeowners could afford their current housing costs for the next 3+ months. Both renters and homeowners are facing this trouble. And so I think, we're all in this moment of crisis, but how are we moving beyond the immediate concerns to how are we going to help people get out of this moment? Just to share a little bit of information, again, this is a report that Whitney shared in the chat, but this is from the MAPC COVID-19 Layoff Housing Gap Report. Even with the expanded CARES Act unemployment benefits, which Maureen was talking about, there's still this estimated 7,800 renter households and 7,700 owner households who will have trouble paying for their basic needs. You heard Rob give an estimate of the dollar amount of what that would take to assist everyone who's on the raft waiting list in the South Shore region. But collectively throughout the state, it would be 15,500 households needing approximately $13.8 million monthly. That's a big number. And even going forward, if these same workers are unable to work in August after the unemployment benefits end, the situation just gets worse. And so I think, you can see these numbers here that the average monthly assistance needed is $935 per renter household, $1,290 per owner household. So to fill that gap, there's a statewide assistance gap of $195 million monthly. It's a lot. So I think, these are just charts and numbers to help you have the conversation that we want you to get into now. So we are about to go into our breakout rooms, and these are some regional topics I want you to be thinking about as I'm just to summarize what I've heard from the conversations we've been having in this region. Certainly, how are we responding with emergency rental assistance programs, both RAFT and some local ones? Whitney is going to share in the chat where there have been local emergency rental assistance programs created. But what happens after the moratorium is lifted? Are people able to access those funds? We keep hearing over and over, we've got money available, but if they don't know where to call, if they don't know if they're eligible, if they don't know how to fill out the forms, is that a concern in your communities? Certainly the concerns of undocumented immigrants, both being able to access all of the funds, but also allaying any fears they might have about what the impacts of filling out the forms and submitting their information might be, and making sure that the information is both available and safe and accessible to them. One thing that was raised in this region, I think in particular, is some of the disparities across the region. So you have some communities like Brockton who have been the hardest hit by COVID-19, who have the really high percentages of frontline workers, versus some other communities that have fared fairly well in this moment. And how do we work as a region to address these concerns rather than community by community? I want to just raise, I don't know if Maureen can speak very briefly, but there are additional CDBG CARES funds that are being administered by the Plymouth County Commissioners, and how these funds are going to be used. I think we want to add that to the conversation of what Ryan was speaking about, how all of the money that's at the federal level, how that's going to be allocated. Certainly, we're thinking about the impact of housing as healthcare. We hear it over and over right now. We want to think about how regionalization can help in this moment. And also this moment has brought up for us racial equity. And we see at CHAPA the role that housing and zoning have to play in creating a more equitable state, a more equitable commonwealth, and more equitable communities. So when we talk about exclusionary policies and zoning restrictions and things like that, we want to make sure that every community that we're talking about is having these important conversations. So I will move on. So these are the discussion questions. Whitney is going to share in the chat, or I believe she already has, a document. You can download it, and you should be able to download it and paste the link that it gives you into your browser, so that when you go into the breakout rooms, you'll still be able to see these topics and the discussion questions, so that you don't have to keep coming back to us for these questions. So we're trying this without paper copies, and hopefully you guys are able to grab it. If are folks able to access that document, if you could hear a nod of heads, or if you can unmute yourself and let me know. I see a couple of yeses in the chat function. Okay, great. So what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna send you all into a breakout room. You'll have about 15 minutes or so in the breakout room to talk about the things that you've heard on this call, talk about some of the things that you're experiencing and concerns, gaps that you're seeing. You know, where do we go from here? How do we continue to address our housing needs beyond COVID-19? I really appreciated Rob sharing that, you know, you have some specific development projects that are moving forward even in this moment, but many communities are struggling with permitting, they're struggling with public meetings and putting focus on anything other than the immediate response to COVID-19. So we want to hear if you guys are grappling with any of that. And what are the gaps that you're seeing, especially among the state and federal resources? Are they helping your community as planned, or are there things that you really need that you can submit back to us to try to advocate for? So when you get this document, you're going to go into your breakout rooms. My email address is on the document. Please have one person in the breakout room take notes and send your notes to me. I promise we will be using these to dig into our advocacy, both at the state, federal levels, and in our work, Whitney and I, at the municipal level. And we'll also be sharing it with our regional partners so that you all can respond to the needs. So we are going to send you into the breakout rooms. Bear with me. And you'll hear a little note from me when it's time to come back. And there's also a little button on there if you need assistance. Don't hesitate to call me, and I'll be able to come into the breakout room with you. So just one second. All right, here you go. I'll see you in just about 15 minutes. Hi, Barbara. Barbara, can you hear me? You're on, there you are.
Yes.
So folks are just in breakout discussion groups right now. Do you want to join them?
Sure. I was in one, but they couldn't hear me, and I got onto a different device. I was using, these are state computers, so they've got all sorts of protections.
What room were you in? Do you want me to send you back in for a few
It
minutes?
was Abby and one of the other speakers, Ryan, that group.
Okay. Yep, I'll
Yeah.
send you there, see if it works. Hopefully they'll be able to hear you better.
Thank you.
You should have a little note asking you to go to breakout room 1.
Okay. I don't see it yet. You know what? I'm on an Surface Pro.
Oh, okay.
I'm wondering.
Well,
if
I'm going to be bringing folks back in 1 minute or 2, so sorry about that.
Oh, I'm sorry to take your time.
That's okay.
I can just mute myself and let you work so that, and I'll wait.
Okay. I'm just waiting for folks. I'll be bringing them back in a minute, so.
Okay, all right.
No problem.
Do what you need to do, and I'll just wait.
Thank
all right,
you.
Thank you.
All right, so folks should be coming back in from the breakout rooms. We'll give everyone a second to get back and see your smiling faces back in this room with us. I hope you all enjoyed your small group conversations. So let's go back to these questions. How did it go? We don't have time for every group to share everything you discussed. I hope that someone was taking notes or thinking about how to share that with us, because as I said, we really do want to take that information in and use it. But any things that came up in your discussions that you think were really, really interesting, or you want folks in the other groups to know, feel free to unmute yourself and just speak if you're able.
I would like to give a really interesting issue. I'm a small landlord, and I really like to join today's meeting. I found have a lot of money to help tenant and the landlord. That's great, but I think no matter how big money, that only help a person temporarily. But for the fundamental, for the long time, we should do something to try to find a more affordable living house. I have a proposal. The proposal can really help. And I would like to join some main point. Can I see now? I have a document. Can I share, or I just by talking?
I'm not sure. You're trying to share a document that we can see, or?
Yes, yes. I have a document, and then just like how I can let the people see, or I can talk about.
You could share something in the chat, or you could email it to me and we could share it afterwards.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
unfortunately, there's no way to share your screen unless you're one of the hosts, but if there's something you wanted to share with folks in the chat, you could as well.
Yes, yes. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
So I just want like a CHAPA can do something like to make some policy change. If policy change, and will be get a more affordable house. For
Yes.
example, now people cannot pay one whole apartment, and then but they would like to downsize. They say, okay, I cannot pay the whole department. Can I only rent one bedroom? And then we can afford. Many vulnerable people, like unemployed people, divorced people, single people, students, they only need one single room.
Yeah.
They only afford one single room. But landlord cannot rent people one single room because now the city said, okay, you only can rent one apartment. I think now is the time to change some policy. The policy can allow the landlord to rent one single room to the.
Okay. Yeah.
In this case, many homeless people will not face homeless. That is one.
Yeah. So I hear, what I hear you saying is, so first of all, I would encourage you, I'm actually going to share some of our committees. I know Abinya shared some of them at the beginning. We do have a production committee. That would be a great place to be part of that conversation. And also whatever community you live in, many of the conversations around having a diversity of housing options. So what you're describing sounds to me like there's not enough smaller units for people who just need one bedroom or a studio, or they maybe can't afford what is available in the community. And so how can we look at your local zoning, look at your local production, and see what might be able to be created, or how do we break up some of the larger units in order to better serve people's needs. So we'll definitely take those notes. And I see Whitney shared in the chat my email address, so if you have a document that you want to share afterwards, but I will direct you to our website for our CHAPA committees. That production committee I think would be very helpful. Ryan, were you going to weigh in on that as well?
Okay, where's your email?
My email is in the chat, dlewinter@chapa.org. Other thoughts that came up in the discussion groups that surprised you or what you were grappling with?
Sure, I'd be happy to share, Dana. The South Shore Chamber is doing a lot of work around housing from a regional perspective and looking at it as an economic development tool, and concerned that the pandemic will exacerbate the limited regional housing production. But on a positive note, we have been hearing back that there's new and different faces attending local meetings now that they're available by Zoom. So the Zoom meeting, part of this might be engaging a broader audience.
Yeah.
Mass Housing Partnership is doing a lot of work on density issues and has approved 5 or 6 new loans for affordable housing since the pandemic, which is really a great symbol of confidence and the desire to keep moving. MHP also developed COVID underwriting standards and is doing a lot of work around those issues. And some of the other people in the group were talking about hoping for changes in the length of applications and processes and services for their clients.
Thank you, Dottie. I think that's great. And one of the things, Whitney talked about it in her discussion, but one of the things we're actually seeing is housing is being elevated as an issue right now, right? Everyone understands in the moment of COVID-19 that having a roof over your head that's safe, accessible, where you can shelter in place is so important. Those of us on this call, we've been talking this talk for a long time, but there's a lot of people who are new to this conversation, that we think we can continue that momentum. They've been doing grocery deliveries, they've been making sure people can make their rent payments, and we want to make sure that they come into the conversation and continue our efforts. I think also on that racial equity conversation that's happening, people are trying to understand what are the barriers that are happening out there. What they may not be, you know, as Dottie said, they're not able to go to public meetings normally, but now they are because they're accessing them via Zoom. How do we use that momentum and use people's interest in this, use people's interest in making sure our small businesses come back strong, to continue to support housing production and affordability as opposed to falling back to opponents of it. So thank you, Dottie, for all of those comments. I really appreciate it. And I should mention Courtney from the South Shore Chamber, I believe, is on the call somewhere. She's waving her hand for those of you who can see her face. Been doing excellent work on this as well. Other comments? We have just a few more minutes. If I see someone is, T. Holtz is unmuted. I don't know if you wanted, I don't know what your first name is.
Teresa, I apologize.
Teresa, yes.
I know one of the things that I would like next time we do this is just a little bit more time to get through some of the questions. I think our group was more of trying to figure it out and got through the first question. So it would be nice to kind of get more time in to discuss some of the questions. I think our concern, the biggest concern, is that a lot of people are not utilizing the programs at this point. But in August, we may get slammed with a lot of people asking for help.
Yeah.
Right now we're talking, pretty large amount, but come August, when things really start to come up and running and people start filing claims, and we're just going to get just overwhelmed. And so how do we move forward with that? How do we get the word out to people to really start utilizing or to start utilizing the programs that are out there right now?
Thank you, Teresa. And thank you for the comment. I love hearing people say they'd rather stay on my meetings longer than I've asked them to stay. It's, especially we're all so tired of Zoom. And, if there's interest, I'm happy. I know there's many of you in the region, maybe NHS or the South Shore Chamber could do another reconvening just to have more discussion. We're happy to do that as well if there's interest in that. We really like to see ourselves as a convener and a place to have these discussions. So if there's interest, more to come on that, but definitely on how to make sure people are using that. I hear that loud and clear. So thank you for that, Teresa. We probably have time for maybe one more comment. Ryan?
Yeah, I think one interesting thing, so we had a planner from Canton, planner from Cape Cod, and one of the things that they were discussing in our group was, cities and towns don't have to go at it alone when they apply for, the various funding sources that are coming from the federal government. So they brought up CDBG as a specific example, and how they've worked with other cities and towns that might have more capacity to, put together a proposal to apply for these funds. So I would just recommend that, if you are working closely with other cities and towns and maybe take a more of a regional approach to applying for CDBG, I think that could be very helpful. So it doesn't seem like all these cities and towns are kind of fighting each other for the same resources. Because, I know that all of your regional cities and towns are probably dealing with the same issues and could use the same kind of funding sources. So I would just say that.
Thank you, Ryan. That's a great tip, and definitely from an administrative perspective, to have one place administering some of these funds as opposed to each of the communities trying to have their own place and multiple places that people have to apply will be critical, and just making sure people have access and don't get lost in the process. So thanks for that tip to those communities that were represented. So I know that some folks want to stay with us, but others of you I know are ready to move on. But so I will just close up quickly here with a couple of things that we would like you to do as you're going forward. Again, just a note, if you were taking notes, please send those to me so that we can compile them and share. We will be sharing these slides. Please join one of our CHAPA committees. We continue to meet virtually. Our policy staff is running all of those very capably, and your input is really critical to the conversations that we're having at those meetings. So here's a list of our committees here. Please attend our forums. We are still doing forums in this moment, again, virtually, but we've had some very well attended forums on emergency rental assistance programs and RAFT, and we have been having weekly Friday calls. Those are on hiatus right now while we think about a racial equity town hall, but we are going to continue to be convening folks, and you can learn about all of those on our website. We also have our annual dinner. Please save the date or mark it on your calendars for October 21st. Again, it will be virtual, but we've been trying to plan some things to make it fun and engaging, like we know it always is for all of you. So if you go to our website, you can do all of those things. You can sign up for events. You can get our monthly housing briefs. You can join a committee. You can engage with our MEI program. As Whitney mentioned, there's a place to tell us where you live. We can connect you maybe with some of your neighbors who are trying to organize. And you can also become a CHAPA member. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. And here is our contact information. And don't forget to save the chat by clicking on those 3 buttons at the bottom. But again, if there's anything else you need, you can reach out to us. And thanks again to Bank of America and to Rob and Maureen from NHS for co-hosting with us.
Thank you, Dana. Can I just ask, when is the next virtual meeting like this again? This is my first.
Sure. Well, right now we're doing regional meetings. So on Thursday, we have the North Shore, Merrimack Valley. We have a bunch of them next week. And then after that, we'll probably come back to our statewide convening. So you're welcome to join any of the regional meetings. They're open to anyone and everyone, but the conversations will probably be targeted to the concerns and strategies that are happening in each of those regions.
Okay.
And you can find all of those if you go to our website. We have an events calendar where you can check it out. And Jenna, I believe, yes, just shared our events page in the chat, so you can take a look at that.
Okay, perfect.
And oh, sorry, and I did see someone shared in the chat a comment about housing as healthcare. Yes, amen. Thank you. And I will take that note back to us as well. So thank you everyone for joining us. If there's any last comments, please feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, we'll say goodbye.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, CHAPA.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you all.